Hey Crown Crew, it's Crown. How's it going? I hope you're doing well. Today I'm posting a long compilation of some of the best stories we've read on our channel. It's packed with all your favorite entitled people moments and intense comebacks. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy these compilations and if it's something you'd like to see more often. Your feedback means the world to me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our daily fresh stories. And now, without further ado, let's go! I'm not really a Redditor, but a friend of mine helped me to set up this account and type this story out. I apologize for how long it is, but once you've read it, you can see how convoluted the HOA was in my area. I live in a neighborhood that an HOA was formed in over a decade ago. I was essentially raised by my grandparents because my own parents really did not want me and just wanted my little sister, whom they repeatedly said was the one they did not regret. I was born from an accidental teen pregnancy and my parents showed very little love for me. So from the age of 10, my grandparents raised me, and they left me their house when they passed away. I never married, just wasn't interested. But I'm a bit of a paranoid man who was keeping supplies stocked. When COVID hit, I already had a generous supply of soap, sanitizer, toilet paper, paper towels, disinfectant, bottled water, canned food, medical supplies, and even whiskey. Still keep all that well stocked, but it was from years of buying that stuff little by little. I also have a generator and a generous supply of filled propane tanks for heat, and some insulated sleeping bags. I wish I had a wood stove too, but the house wasn't built with one. The HOA and I also did not get along. My grandparents turned down their invitation to join, and so did I when I inherited the house. Most of the time the HOA left me alone. However, back then the president would come to our door to say something whenever he had a bone to pick with us. It never got him far, and I did kind of find it amusing to see how my grandpa would send him packing. When the pandemic hit, word spread about my stash of supplies. I willingly shared some with my neighbors and friends, but certainly not with anyone on the HOA board, as they have been a thorn in my family's side for years. When the HOA was formed, they demanded for months that my grandparents join, and they had the balls to try numerous underhanded tactics, all of which I documented in various ways. They thought they could pick on an elderly couple and say they were members whether they liked it or not. They stated rules that they completely made up and repeatedly threatened us, even saying they would come into the house to take away our guns because the HOA did not approve of any firearms. We checked their bylaws and there was nothing about guns on it. In fact, they were trying to force the same thing on some of the other residents, all of whom fought back, and that fake bylaw was soon dropped when there was talks of rebellion. But the HOA still didn't leave us alone. I convinced my grandparents to let me install CCTV cameras so I could catch every further interaction of the HOA board, showing up demanding my grandparents join and threatening them. This turned out to be a very good idea as the HOA attempted to have all 3 vehicles towed from my grandparents' driveway. We confronted the tow driver truck that was attempting to take my grandparents' old wagon, and he said to take it up with the HOA, as they were authorized to tow from them. When we told him that our house was not a part of the HOA, the driver didn't care and took the car anyway. We called the police to get the car back, and the police had to talk to the HOA board, who were forced to admit being in the wrong as they were all sniveling cowards. The police then had some words with the tow company, and they brought the car back free of charge. The tow driver glared at us after he put the wagon back, and he never returned. Well, that incident was the final nail in the coffin, and my grandpa started a lawsuit against the HOA board for harassment, and when their lawyer saw my pile of evidence, he told him to just settle out of court. The HOA paid the court and lawyer fees, and my grandparents got a few grand on top of that. From then on, the HOA board stayed far away from us, but there was obvious animosity. They even tried to get our neighbors to shun us, which did not work out. When I inherited the house from my grandparents, The HOA already knew me well and didn't really bother to try and pull the same stunts of harassment they had before with my grandparents. But they did try once to emphatically suggest I join. But I told them to kick rocks and I'll leave them alone if they leave me alone. If not, they were free to answer to my 12-gauge and police. As I'm not the type of person to hesitate in defending myself or calling the cops so the HOA starts making trouble with me. I would also have no problem suing for harassment like my grandparents did. It was clear to them that leaving me alone for the moment was a better choice. So that was supposed to be the last time I had any trouble with them, at least until the incident a couple of years later that I'm about to describe. As supplies became available again in late 2020, I replenished my stock. However, the 2021 January ice storm hit my area hard, and we were without power for over a week in the dead of the winter, and I was the only person in the neighborhood properly prepared for it. I had some neighbors with generators, but many of them ran out of gas to generate power within a few days. My generator wasn't enough to power my whole house, just key things like my fridge, freezer, microwave, and a few other necessities. I kept my house warm with propane. I had battery-powered lighting, plenty of books to read, portable DVD players, my laptop, and I had a large number of filled propane tanks in a variety of sizes at the ready to keep warm with. So I was okay. My neighbors not so much though. No one could drive anywhere. It was about minus 15 Fahrenheit degrees outside, if not colder. There was debris everywhere from fallen trees. The ground was covered in a sheet of a very slippery ice that was on top of snow, and there were many fallen trees, some of which completely blocked the roads. My next-door neighbors, who are friends of mine, were having a very hard time keeping warm. At the time, they had a baby who was only a few months old at the time, and they were not prepared for the outage at all. And there was one more family across the street whose house had a tree fall on it. So I invited both families into my home. I also took in a retired elderly couple from a few houses down that were freezing because they had no form of heat. All those people stayed with me for the duration of the outage. I invited the first family over right after the power went out because I knew they were not prepared. And the family whose house was damaged by a tree, I brought over while the storm was still going on in the middle of the night. When the tree landed on their house, it took out an entire section of it and exposed the inside of the house to the elements. The father of the family came to me in a panic and I tied a rope to my Porsche and we made our way to his damaged house to get his family back to mine. We used the rope to pull ourselves back to my house because of all the ice, darkness, and storming frozen winds. I managed to get the whole family over, and after the storm was over, they also brought what supplies they had, including more propane, another generator, and more gasoline they've been storing. That all went pretty far for heating and powering my house. I had more than enough supplies for all of us, and collectively we had a myriad of electronic devices to use, many of which were rechargeable. But I had a lot of batteries for those that weren't, and those were great at keeping kids entertained. They also had handheld gaming devices of their own we were able to keep charged thanks to that generator. I wasn't used to living with other people since my grandparents died, but it felt good to help them out. Then there was the elderly couple down the street I referred to as George and Gracie that came to stay with me too. They were good friends of my grandparents, so I checked in on them and found they had no heat without electricity. They were sitting in a running car just to use a heater in that. George had just barely managed to chip off enough ice to get the car door open so they could sit in it. I brought them in and they sort of became like the temporary grandparents of the house and helped look after the kids. The HOA board, though, was somewhat aware of my supplies. They could easily see my house was thriving during the outage. So they came over in a group to talk to me on the second day of the outage. They had some idea of having everyone in the HOA board go stay in one building. And they wanted that building to be my house because I already had supplies and heat. I told them that I wasn't hosting their group in my home. I was already taking care of 2 families and an elderly couple not related to me. And that was enough. I got a lecture on being neighborly from them, but I just lectured them back that I had made my decision and to look for somewhere else to bundle up. And besides that, I clearly did not trust them for obvious reasons, and they were the last people in the neighborhood I'd let into my home. Then I shut my door in their faces. If I had hosted all of those entitled people and their families, my house would have been beyond crowded, and all of my supplies would have been taken from me. In situations like those, people will resort to taking and calling it sharing. I wasn't about to risk that, but I did still hand out water and sanitizer to neighbors that came by. The HOA board wasn't done with me though. On the third day of the outage, they crowded my house, with their families demanding to be allowed entry into my home. I told them that I had no room and to leave me alone. The HOA board didn't take no for an answer though and tried to force their way in. But I am not a small man. I knocked their leader right down and off my porch and told them that if they tried that again, I'd make sure to notify police later. I was then backed up by the other men not taken in. They were armed. The HOA president yelled at me that they were all freezing and needed entry. But I was already hosting 10 people in my house and giving out supplies to neighbors. I wasn't going to take on any more. Then I told the HOA board to leave or I'd be getting my shotgun. Well, after they left, the two dads, George and I, had a bit of a meeting and decided we needed to take turns keeping watch. I referred to the dads as Dad 1 and the other as Dad 2, in the order in which I invited them over. And George is, well, George of course. For an old man in his 70s, he had some strength and grit to him like a man 20 years younger. We all agreed there was no way those a-holes of the HOA board would take this all laying down. At times like this, men will become animals to get what they want. So we started taking shifts, guarding the house and supplies. I slept on my couch with my 12 gauge next to me. And on that very night, I got woken up by Dad 2, who was currently on watch yelling for me. I came running into the garage to find Dad 2 against the garage door and holding it shut. He said there were people outside trying to force it open. It was right about that moment we heard a very loud gunshot. It turned out to be George at my back door. He grabbed his own shotgun that he brought from his house and fired it into the air outside when he caught two men in my backyard trying to get in through the door. Dad 1 woke up and came running out to help, and we all ran into the backyard. We found my side gates had been forced open. The old latch had been broken. We made our way out front from there and saw roughly 10 people trying to run across the road with weapons in hand, like bats, claw hammers, and crowbars. And they were repeatedly slipping and falling on the ice that covered the road. All of them were the HOA board members and the people related to them, like their teenage sons or brothers. We blinded them all with 1,000 lumen flashlights and ramped them up at the edge of the sidewalk. We had them all drop their weapons, and George mused we should break a few of their fingers just to scare them a bit more. They all begged us not to report them to the police, and I said to never come back or the next time somebody might get shot. They skittered off like frightened children trying to run across an ice rink. We did a makeshift repair on my gate to keep it closed. And the rest of the week, all four of us spent nights on guard. We played lots of cards and board games, drank whiskey, and did regular patrols around the house. No one from the HOA board came back to bother us. There was an occasional knock for help from someone needing something though. The neighbors were really needing water and I was running out of it. So I'd taken to melting ice in pots and boiling it with an electric hot plate, then filling jugs. I gave several of my neighbors clean drinking water. The rest of the outage was otherwise uneventful until the thaw kicked in and more stuff started falling as the ice broke apart. When the ice and snow had all cleared up, the widespread damage was pretty evident. It took the county months to clean up all the debris. We found out later that the other neighbors had followed our example and basically banded together 3 or so families per home to try and stay warm and share supplies. Pretty much the whole of the HOA board wasn't welcome to join in since they were hated by pretty much everyone by that point. So they all had to band together in the one house they owned that had a wood-burning stove. and they burned pretty much anything they could get their hands on, some of which they took from neighbors. There was evidence of repeated thefts and vandalism all over the neighborhood, and the key suspects were the HOA board and their families. But none of the neighbors could prove it was them. My CCTV was off due to the power being out, but we made sure all our neighbors knew what caught the HOA board trying to break into my house. After the power was finally back on, there was a lot of work to do, like Dad 2 making an insurance claim to fix his house. Dad 2's family actually ended up staying with me for a while longer before the home repairs could really get started. George and Gracie's old house suffered a few broken pipes due to the freezing cold, but George is a retired plumber, so he handled it. A large limb had fallen on Dad 1's car and did enough damage that it was later considered totaled. I didn't really have any time to help any of them out much, as I had to go back to work a couple days after the power was back on, and I was kept very busy for a while. Being sick of the HOA board, the bulk of the neighborhood filed in February to have an emergency HOA meeting, and in said meeting they wanted the entire board to resign. They refused to step down and residents had to get lawyers involved. It did go to court, and the HOA itself was found to be violating the law several ways and embezzling funds. The entire HOA was shut down pending a full investigation. At first, it was just a temporary shutdown, and then it became permanent. All of the former board members have left the neighborhood, and I ended up making some great friends with Dad 1 and Dad 2, and we're regular backyard drinking buddies now. I pay a visit to George and Gracie now and then too. They have all taken to keeping supplies like I have as well, just in case this sort of thing ever happens again. I'll start this off by saying my ex is vindictive as hell. We've been fully divorced since about right before the pandemic started. We sold a house we shared, and I didn't have to pay her alimony because she cheated, and we're in an at-fault state. It has been messy since the day, all the stereotypes. First the sopping and then trickled through saying I love you. It was just one time, okay, it was 2 years. And then the gaslighting followed by I'm going to take you for everything. Before packing her stuff and walking out. I feel like I never really knew the woman my ex was in all the time we were together. We were married for 5 years and together for 7. And in 2 of those 5 married years she had affairs with 3 other men. The final one being a foreign businessman of some sort, from what I could find out. Yes, I got tested for STDs and was thankfully negative. Yes, she got pregnant by the final AP, and no, I didn't sign the birth certificate because I found out about all the affairs before the baby was born thanks to a call from the first AP. My ex tried to go full scorched earth on me, but since we live in and were married in an at-fault state, she lost. We didn't pay equally into our house, and the equity was divided 70-30. So I got a pretty good cash payout when I sold our marital home to put as a down payment on a different house closer to my job. It's a bit of a downgrade, but suits a single guy in his 30s like me just fine. My ex did show up to my house once, but I refused to let her in. She witched at me that I'd financially ruined her in a divorce. I said that if she was fully willing to do that to me first, and the witch had the audacity to say it should have been my life screwed over and not hers. I laughed so hard and said it was karma. She yelled that she'd sue me for what was rightfully hers. I said if she was going to sue me, then to go ahead and sue me. It would end up the same way in court because she has nothing but a false sob story. She was a cheater and not me. I'm no angel, but I did not do anything to her, and she was the one who ruined our marriage. She then said she'd tell everyone she could that I abused her. I said I'd sue her for defamation if she did, and I was recording our interaction and had those words saved to my phone. She went wide-eyed and her jaw dropped, the look people are calling the surprised Pikachu face. Then I asked why she was there, if not to just try and make trouble. Because she had a new man in her life that knocked her up. She just huffed at me and said he isn't around much, and she's stuck in a tiny apartment living off his child support till he comes back. It was immature of me, I know, but I did a bit of playing the world's smallest violin. She yelled at me to go screw myself, and I yelled back that I'd sooner do that than her anytime. She raged at me and then got in her car to leave, and I haven't seen her since. There is an HOA in my neighborhood, but I was not legally obligated to join it because the last owner of my house was not a member. I made sure of that through a real estate lawyer as well. The HOA had no grounds to force me to join and were not happy about it. The HOA president would show up with forms every week for the first month demanding that I sign them. Then she threatened to take me to court, to which I had to get a C&D sent to her from my lawyer to make her stop that. So she started harassing me by looking for an infractions she possibly could to report to the city. An inspector came out several times and found nothing wrong. In fact, I offered one of them a burger while grilling, and they graciously accepted. Did I mention the HOA hates barbecues and parties that aren't approved in advance? Well, they do, and I like to grill when the weather is good. And my neighbors actually love me for it because I invite them over. I had the police call on me several times for noise complaints because I was playing music on a Saturday afternoon while having my friends over. The HOA president I caught trespassing once when she was trying to peer into my windows. I called the police, but she denied ever doing it. So I got cameras. She hasn't trespassed since, but I still got repeated passive-aggressive letters saying my cameras were not an approved addition to my house. Some months ago, I started getting letters for fines in the mail, and when I contacted the HOA, the representative claimed they had it on record that I joined and needed to pay all fees effective immediately. I told them that was not possible. Then they emailed a scanned copy of the forms, and they had a signature on them, but it was not mine. It was very similar in some ways, and I recognized right away as being my ex's handwriting. She knew what my signature looked like, but it was a loose imitation at best. I got in touch with a lawyer right away over the forged signature, but the HOA still demanded to go to court. It took 7 months before that happened. Meanwhile, they were stacking unpaid fines against me weekly and were threatening to put a lien on my house. We went to court and the HOA president looked very smug, but my lawyer pointed out how the signature wasn't the same as mine. It was very inconsistent in the various forms. I'd never allowed the HOA president to my house, and I'd never requested the forms. The idiot HOA president actually slammed her palm on the table and said it was still binding. But when pressed where the fraudulent signature came from, she admitted my ex-wife called the HOA and they sent her the forms, then got them back in the mail signed. But then she actually claimed she thought I'd signed them. The judge looked at her and asked if she was serious. She confirmed she was. The judge then asked how a woman I was no longer married to, even lived with me in my current residence, was supposed to have any bearing on whether or not I joined her HOA. She went quiet and I could see the "oh crap" look on her face as the hamster wheels were turning and she seemed to finally mentally put the pieces together. My lawyer then counterclaimed that what the HOA did was blatant fraud. Illegal actions must be taken, and they were. I countersued the HOA for the emotional distress of the harassment I'd gotten since moving in, which I had lots of proof of. That won me about 10 grand after lawyer fees that I decided to put towards my mortgage. The HOA president was removed from her throne. I'd like to think she was kicking and screaming. She was also slapped with a hefty fine. I've seen her outside a few times and she always looks at me like I'm the devil. The HOA itself had to pay all of my legal fees too. I wanted to go after my ex for forging my signature but can't because not long after she forged my signature on those forms, she apparently left the country to be with her third AP. She's somewhere in Europe from what I can see of the final posts on her Facebook before she disappeared. So I can't do anything against her unless she ever returns to the US. So that was a wash. I'm not getting letters from the HOA anymore though, and the new president has promised to keep things completely cordial from now on. I still don't feel like I got much of a win in this though, Other than a 10K payout, it all felt like a huge waste of time. Date. The wheel turns, but the hamster is long dead. That's the best way to describe the stupidity of my ex-wife and her parents. My ex was dumb enough to come back to the US even though there were fraud charges waiting for her here. Since I posted some time ago about my ex-wife, I feel I owe it to everyone here to provide an update. So, to give a quick recap, I posted a couple of years ago about how my ex forged my signature on HOA forms to try and screw me over for divorcing her. And then she ran off to Europe to avoid charges before I had a chance to file them. Even her social media went dark, so I figured she'd left for good. However, her affair partner who'd knocked her up eventually kicked her and their kids out. Then they came back to the US after my ex begged her parents to buy them tickets home. I guess the AP just wanted her as a side piece that he could toss out like a used doll once he was done with her. I kinda don't blame him for kicking her out because she's evil, but at the same time he booted out his own kid too. If that's what he intended to do from the start, then he's just one of the worst kinds of people. The fraud case was obviously still open against my wife. The fraud case was obviously still open against my ex, and she got arrested not long after coming back into the country because her passport was flagged, and police were there to arrest her on landing. When I finally saw her in court, she looked very different. She put on weight, she couldn't dye her hair or cake her face and makeup anymore, and there was just this aura of defeat about her. Not long after she was arrested, her parents showed up at my house and pleaded with me to drop any charges I could, and then even had the audacity to ask me to take my ex back. Of course, I refused, but it was in one ear and out the other with him. I visited my ex at jail only once because her parents hounded me for weeks, and she put on the same kind of pitiful "I love you, feel sorry for me" act as when I first confronted her with evidence of her infidelity. I told her she couldn't be serious after the crap she pulled. She never loved me. She cheated on me with 3 men that I knew of, and possibly more. She got pregnant by another man and had no remorse about how she destroyed our marriage. Then she maliciously tried to defame me, and she illegally signed me up for an HOA by forging my signature. And for the cherry on top, she ran away to another country like the pathetic, cowardly witch she is. And she somehow hoped I would take her back after all of that. Well, that was enough to make her see that she had zero chance of manipulating me. Even if hell froze over, I'd not take this woman back in any way. Her parents also couldn't really argue with my reasoning, other than repeatedly saying that she's their only daughter and the mother of their only grandchild. Her mother kept crying that my ex could change. I said she could change without me. I am done with her. Then they tried the stupidest thing yet. They told me my ex and I were still married in the eyes of God, and that I have to help her because it's the Christian thing to do. I asked him what the Bible said about infidelity if they were going to bring religion into it, and then they shut up. I then slammed the door in their faces. They still hounded me till I called the police on them, and then got my lawyer to send a CND to my ex's parents to stop trying to contact me, or I'd file charges against them too. That finally stopped them. But I do kinda wonder if they will try to pursue child support from the father of my ex's kid, since they are stuck raising them now. If that's even possible, with the father being in a different country and all, and on the move a lot from what I heard. My ex could not be bailed out of jail by her parents because she was denied that option, since already being guilty of fleeing once. And even if she did have a civ bail, I bet it would have been so high. There is no way her parents could have paid it. My ex originally pleaded not guilty, but I think her lawyer convinced her to change it to guilty for a lesser sentence. The only problem for her was the judge presiding over the trial was a real hard A. And they charged my ex with felony fraud for forging my signature and mailing it, as well as knowingly fleeing the country to avoid charges. She got hit with a decent sentence of nearly a decade behind bars, no parole. By the time she gets out of prison, she will be 42 years old. She broke down sobbing on a floor and had to be dragged out. I won't miss her. I think justice was served. I wasn't ecstatic about it or anything because I'd emotionally moved on from that woman long ago, and I've become happier because I've been dating a great woman for the past 6 months. She's a single mom and works as a clerk. Honestly, I already think I love her more than I ever did my ex. Her son seems to like me a lot too. His own dad is someone I haven't heard great things about. If anyone was still wondering about the HOA though, they have kept their promise and left me alone. But I've heard that behind closed doors, the old boards that were all inevitably replaced hate my guts because I basically started their downfall. Yes, the entire board was eventually replaced, and the new board is running things far better now. Fines nearly stopped, monthly dues were lowered, several rules were removed from the CCNRs, and the street has been a happier place for a year now. I worked as a shift night manager at a local chain pizzeria for some time in my college years. I was hired by Owen, the franchise owner. My store GM was Jay, but he spent most of his time at our new store. There were two other managers, Amy, who was day shift manager, and Bill, who was not officially a manager but worked on Amy in my days off as a shift manager. This store was probably the most crime-ridden place I'd ever worked. They actually had a second drawer just for the case you got robbed. My first solo night, my driver was stabbed during a robbery while getting into his car. Sometime during my first months, the store both got robbed and was broken into. Now, we were only a few blocks from the county jail, and the sheriff's office, state police post, EMS garage, and right across the street from a firehouse. But that did not seem to discourage those looking for a quick buck. So shortly after the store got robbed, I found an old urn-style coffee maker in storage and got an idea. The next day on my way to work, I stopped at the local service supply store, picked up some coffee cups with lids and a little dry erase board. And mind you, I didn't have purchasing abilities yet, just picked it out of my own pocket. I got to work, set it all up and wrote on a sign, police, fire, EMS, help yourself. The first couple days had no takers, but I did sell a couple cups for a few cents. It might have been a week when someone broke into one of the other businesses in a strip mall. Of course, the officers came in asking if we'd seen anything, then helped themselves to a cup of coffee. From then on, we almost always had at least one officer either in a store or parked in the lots out front. And suddenly, we no longer had a bunch of crime at the store. Not only that, but they were coming in, ordering food, sales across the board shot up, and it was a win-win in my book. Amy and Belle have both adopted the free coffee policy, but we all took turns restocking the coffee supply since Jay barely added anything extra to the automatic order as it was. Third month's woes. We had a store meeting every month. I got in first, fired up the urn, and waited as Amy, Belle, and Jay trickled in for the meeting. Amy, Bill, and I all had a cup of coffee as Jay went through usuals and then laid into us on the coffee. Jay says, "We're not giving away any more of my coffee." Amy, Bill, and I looked at each other and we said, "We've been buying the coffee and cups. It's no loss to you, and sales are up." "Yeah, we're not a coffee shop and it costs me $1 for every cup. You can't give away $1 all the time." Me knowing full well it was closer to a dime per cup, I said, "Once again, you're not buying the coffee. Here is a receipt with my card on it." This went back and forth a couple rounds. Amy and Bill tapped out when Owen walked in. Owen wanted to start some type of club card program like buy a card, and 5 pizzas, get a free pizza. This is when it hit me. I'd combine club cards and coffee. As soon as the meeting was over, I ran to the back and quickly designed the punch card. I put both punch cards and coffee into the point of sale system. From that day on, I sold 2 club cards. The first, aforementioned pizza club, the other, a coffee club. 12 coffees for $1. I also put up Buy a Hero, a coffee club cup, where customers could drop $1 in for the next fire, EMS, or police officer to get a card. And it was very popular. The best part was that the POS coffee got automatically placed on the order. No need to ask Jay to approve something extra. And we could show Jay how much each cup actually cost. The heroes still got free coffee, along with a lot more customers. J went from thinking he was losing money on coffee to actually losing money on coffee. Owen did not care because club cards were selling. We did so well the rest of our stores had to start carrying coffee as well. My department has the option to work from home, which most of us do around 3 days a week. Most of us live within 10 minutes of the office and commute less than 5 miles. When we go to in-person meetings with clients straight from our houses, we used to be able to charge the mileage of that trip minus our normal commute. Fair enough. Your employer isn't going to pay you to commute. Since I only live 2 miles away from the office, this wasn't usually a big deal. But today, some bigwig in their infinite wisdom decided that they need to dock us 25 miles per trip if we go to any meeting straight from home, because working from home is a privilege and they had to punish us somehow. That's more than my commute has ever been. Even when I lived in freaking farming country and commuted to this same job in a city. And the trips to my meetings are almost never in excess of 25 miles, even round trip. So basically, we won't be getting reimbursed for our trips unless the total miles for the day is over 50 miles. Everyone is livid, especially now that the gas costs a fortune. Our mileage checks weren't even outrageous to begin with. I was making maybe an extra $30 every 2 weeks. And the funniest part, we're allowed to work part of the day from home and part of it from the office. So from now on, we're all gonna be stopping at the office for a hot minute before we go to meetings, costing us maybe an extra 10 minutes out of our day so we can get paid for doing our jobs. Never mind the fact that many of the distances to meetings are even shorter when we go straight from our houses because our client group is assigned geographically based on where we live. To be more efficient and, save on mileage, my entire office, including my boss and even the department head, are in on this malicious compliance, and it's gonna be glorious. Corporate wasn't happy to save 2 miles off a trip? Okay, well now I get to charge the full distance of my trip as stupidity tax. I have a 10-year-old son. He's a semi-ambulant wheelchair user, and he has a medical condition that makes walking difficult, and the older he gets, the more difficult it is. He can walk short distances, 10 to 12 steps, but then it starts to get painful. So he uses a scoop board. Think square skateboard with caster wheels on each corner. He uses it to get around the house and a wheelchair out of the house. He does need his chair, even though he can stand and walk, and he's very independent. Nothing is holding him back. He is also very social. He loves talking to his specialists and knows all the nurses by name and their pet names. He's also well known in our local area, and the employees in the shops all know him. He talks to everyone. Before I start this story, I should add that his wheelchair is not a standard hospital gray wheelchair. It's electric blue, has Pokemon wheel covers, and his rain guard/armrests have stickers of animals on them. The armrests flip up so he has access to the wheels, and they look like wings behind his chair. It's very much modified and personalized. It isn't a gray, stock standard chair. So today we had our monthly pediatrician appointment. We have been seeing the same pediatrician since birth, so he's likely a family friend now. A few days ago, luckily at night during a storm, a tree branch fell onto the building. It took out some windows and caused some water damage, and they have been doing some repair work. So his pediatrician's normal office was unusable, and they had converted another space to use. This meant going up 5 steps. Our pediatrician is a late 30s, early 40s chill-out surfer dude with long hair. He came out to the waiting room and told my son about the room change and that he had to tackle some stairs today or he could have a piggyback ride. Of course, my son chose a piggyback with a giggle. After checking with me that it was okay, he scooped him up and off they went. So I parked his wheelchair out of the way against a wall in the waiting room, and I followed them in. After his appointment, my son was piggybacked out to the waiting room, and our pediatrician popped him on a chair and left to speak with a receptionist. I looked around and his wheelchair was gone. I walked around the corner of the waiting room and there was a child about 8-ish wheeling himself around in it. I know wheelchairs are a fascination to kids and I really didn't mind that he was having a wheel around in it. I find it helps with education and acceptance of kids with disabilities and how much harder life is sometimes, even if wheelchairs are fun. I walked over to him and asked him if he had fun wheeling himself around. The child said he had, and I told him it was my son's wheelchair and I needed it back now, so I could take my son home. He jumped straight out of the chair, smiled at me, and I said thanks and wheeled it towards my son. All was good until the screech happened. "What are you doing?" "That is my son's wheelchair. He was riding in that." "Actually, ma'am, it's my son's." She cut me off. "No, it isn't. My son saw it first." Well, at this point, my son stood up and walked a few steps towards me. He was getting concerned. I say, "This doesn't belong to the practice. I purchased it for my son. It is his." "No, he didn't. He doesn't even need a wheelchair. He can walk." And she turns the wheelchair towards her, but I hold on to the handles firmly. I told my son to go and sit back down as I saw this wasn't going to be a quick enough fix for him to keep standing. I tell her, "Please stop yelling at me. This is my son's wheelchair. I have hundreds of photos of him in it on my phone. See?" I opened the Photos app on my phone and showed her photos of him in the chair with a flywheel attached. "That is a different chair. This doesn't have the thing on the front of it." And she pulled the chair towards her again. "Well, that thing is his bicycle hand crank attachment that allows him to go fast on the bike track like the other kids. It attaches here using these attachments." I point to the attachment. If you look at the chair in this picture, it has a Pokemon wheel covers just like this one, see? This is his chair. I pull the chair back towards me. "No, it isn't. Why can't you wait your turn? Give it back." At this point, the pediatrician comes back from speaking with a receptionist and the entitled mother tries to involve him in the discussion. He ignores her and silently takes the wheelchair from me, walks it around the entitled mother, scoops up my son and settles him in his chair. He turns to the entitled mother and says that this chair is my son's chair. It belongs to him and not to the practice. He tells her you can't have it, and we don't tolerate stealing. Also, the welfare of our existing patients is our focus. Your actions today are contrary to acceptable behavior in this practice. We have decided to not accept your family to the practice. Please leave." The entitled mother screamed, shouted at me about how I had cost her an appointment with my lies and how it wasn't fair. Our pediatrician just put both arms out to his sides. Think big stretching arms forming a T shape with his body. And he stood between her and us and repeated for her to leave. There will be no further discussion and she wouldn't be seen today or any other day. She huffed, grabbed her very embarrassed-looking child's hand and left. Our pediatrician was very apologetic, but honestly he couldn't have done a better job in dealing with the entitled mother. He reached over the counter, grabbed a lollipop and gave it to my son and told me there would be no out-of-pocket payment for us today and to just make an appointment for next month. He's an awesome pediatrician and a human being. We drove the hour and a bit home to our smallish town and stopped at the supermarket to grab some groceries. My son likes to zoom around the supermarket, getting items and bringing them back to me, before zooming off again for the next thing on a list. He knows all the staff and they all talk to him, direct him to where he needs to find his item, and they talk about their pets with him because he's a huge animal lover. It is a social outing for him. So I usually start at the front of the store and make my way through the aisles while my zoomer goes and gets random stuff. We were doing our usual thing and he didn't come back. I didn't think much of it because the staff will often steal him away to the bakery for broken biscuits or an extra donut they can't fit into a package. As I rounded the corner of the next aisle, I saw my son at the other end of the aisle, standing while holding onto a shelf and another kid sitting in his wheelchair. From the way he's standing, I can tell my son is in pain and he's talking to the child, and the entitled mother is talking to my son as well. I can see she's getting animated, but from the other end of the aisle, I can't hear what they are saying. I hurried up the aisle and took hold of my son from the shelf. He's crying and he tells me that the kid won't get out of his wheelchair and the entitled mother won't make him move. I say to the child, "Honey, can you hop out of my son's chair? He's in a lot of pain and needs to get back into it." My son has started to shake and I know he's in quite a bit of pain. His legs will soon just give out from under him. So I lowered him to the floor. The entitled mom says, "No, he won't. He's having a turn. Your bratty kid wouldn't even let him go up and down the aisle more than once before asking for it back. My son has a sore ankle and I'm going to tell the manager we need it more than you." What? This isn't a hired chair. It's my son's chair. Don't be ridiculous. I see a bad chair all the time being used by kids. You may see the chair in here a lot because my son and I come here a lot for our groceries. But it is his chair. No, it isn't. It's in the store every time I come in, and different kids are using it. Well, you're mistaken. It is my son's chair. I have photos of him in it. He needs it back. I open my phone and try and find a picture of my son without the flywheel attachment to avoid the same discussion as the morning. No, we are taking it. And off she goes, wheeling her son away. My son lets out a full-on wail that is a combination of pain and distress that his wheels are leaving. I run the few steps after her and grab out at the chair and firmly say, "No, you aren't taking my son's chair." The wail and my shouting has employees popping out from aisles and the manager comes quickly from the service desk area. The entitled mother tries to preempt the discussion and yells at the manager that my son has had the chair long enough and her son has a sore ankle, so he needs it more, and they should buy more higher chairs so that there are more available to shoppers. I was standing back a little from them because once the manager arrived, I knew he would deal with it, and I needed to check on my son down the aisle on the floor crying. I was trying to calm him down from a distance by letting him know that I wasn't far away, while not letting a $4,500 wheelchair out of my sight. The manager looks at me, looks at her, looks back at me with this look of what the hell on his face, and he asks where my son is. I point and tell him down the aisle on the floor. With a look of horror, he asks if they had tipped him out of his chair. I said I don't know what exactly happened. He was standing holding a shelf when I found him. He turns around and almost roars at this woman to get her son out of a disabled person's wheelchair so we can get him off the floor. It doesn't belong to the store. They do not hire wheelchairs here. The poor child was trying to get out of the chair, and the entitled mother keeps pushing him back down into it, telling him that he needs it. The child is nearly in tears and getting very upset. Meanwhile, 2 staff members have found my son and are now sitting on the floor with him, holding his hand and drying his tears. The manager is losing his mind while is trying to be professional, but I can see he's in disbelief at this woman's stupidity. Then the troops arrive. In the background, I see an employee with 2 police officers in tow. It looked like they were on a break and were grabbing things to eat. The entitled mother turned and was relieved that the police were there to sort out this manager and started on with her wailing story. The policewoman shushed the entitled mother and spoke with the manager, who explained that my son and I were regular customers. He knew us and this was my son's wheelchair. But the entitled mother insisted it was a hired chair. My son was currently sitting on the floor in the next aisle, and the entitled mother wouldn't let her son get out of his chair and insisted he used it. The male officer walked forward and looked down the aisle at my son and nodded at his partner. The female officer very firmly told the entitled mother to get her child out of my son's chair immediately or she would arrest her for theft. Her child tried again to get out of the chair and she pushed him back in again. The officer pulled the wheelchair back and asked the child to hop out, and he immediately did. The entitled mother wailed. The officer then turned the wheelchair around to the male officer who walked down the aisle with it. I don't know exactly what happened next as I was getting my son back into his chair and calming him down. The assistant manager took us back to the manager's office so we had a quiet space. She got my son some water so he could have pain medication, and in about 20 minutes he was fine. He told us that he had stood up and walked 2 steps forward to get something off a higher shelf, and the other child had jumped into his wheelchair and asked if he could ride it up the aisle and back. My son said sure, thinking that this kid would just go up and back and he could get back in, but the entitled mother wouldn't let that happen. He started to cry again, and I told him he was very kind to the little boy and to not let the entitled mother ruin his day. After a while, the manager came into the office and said that the woman had been arrested since she made a scene and was trying to slap the officers, and she was also banned from the store. He said she had been causing trouble in the store for a while with her cariness, and they were glad to see the back of her. He apologized profusely for what had happened. When we left his office, we found that our shopping was all bagged up and ready for us to go. They had taken my shopping list from the trolley, finished my shopping, checked it out at no charge, and bagged it all up, ready for us. When we got home, there were a few extra treats in the bags for my son. About a year ago, I had an encounter that I will never forget. One that reminded me how crazy people can get over the latest gadgets. It all started when my cousin Tom and I decided to embark on an epic gaming marathon weekend. We were determined to make the most of our Friday and Saturday nights. Armed with the newly released Call of Duty Vanguard, little did we know how terrible that game would turn out to be, but that's a story for another time. We headed to our local bullseye, let's call it that, to stock up on snacks and drinks for our gaming binge. As we strolled through the store, I couldn't help but notice a gleaming treasure behind the glass in the electronics section. The last PS5 they had in stock. My heart raced with excitement. Tom, however, wasn't really interested, already having the new Xbox. I promptly sent Tom on a mission to fetch an employee while I stood there, envisioning all the PlayStation exclusive I'd be enjoying in the upcoming months. Everything went smoothly as I purchased the coveted PS5. I was on cloud 9, clutching the bag containing my overpriced prize. But little did I know that my joy was about to be interrupted. A woman, who we will call Susan, she wasn't quite up to Karen level entitlement, but she was close enough, approached us with a panicked "Excuse me." The store employee asked if he could help, but Susan insisted she wanted to chat with me. I made it clear that I didn't work there, but Susan's voice, once sugary sweet, quickly turned sour. Susan demanded, "I see you have the last PS5 they have in stock. Were you going to buy that?" I replied with excitement. "Actually, I already did. I'm so stoked to finally have one." But Susan wasn't having it. She declared, No, you can't have it. I need it. I'll pay you double what you paid for it." Now let me tell you, I had spent ages trying to track down one of these new systems myself. I had searched high and low for an RTX 3080, Xbox Series X, and the elusive PS5, and all to no avail. So no amount of money could have convinced me to part with it. I explained this to Susan, but she was absolutely not having it. All traces of sweetness vanished from Susan's demeanor as she demanded that I hand over the PS5. The store employee, seeing the escalating situation, warned Susan that if she continued to harass customers, he would have to ask her to leave. And Susan's response? "I don't give a fudge what you say. I am going to get back PlayStation." Seizing the opportunity, I slipped away and made a break for the exit. I reached my car and began to pull out the parking space, but lo and behold, I spotted Susan running toward me. Thinking nothing of it, I continued driving, gradually making my way toward the exit. About a mile or so down the road, I heard frantic honking coming from behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw Susan in her BMW SUV. tailgating me and weaving dangerously across the highway. Other than sharing a laugh with Tom, I ignored her entirely. 10 minutes passed and she was still right on my tail when I heard sirens and saw the unmistakable flashing lights of a state police cruiser directly behind Susan. My heart leaped with joy. However, Susan pulled into the right lane, allowing the officer to pass her. To my surprise, the officer pulled up directly behind me, laid on the air horn obnoxiously and motioned for me to pull over. So, I obediently pulled to the side of the road, with Susan following suit behind the officer's car. As the officer approached my vehicle, he treated me like a possible DUI suspect and explained that they had received a call about my vehicle swerving all over the road and driving at erratic speeds. I tried to assure him that everything was fine, but Susan had other plans. Out of nowhere, she screamed, "Officer, arrest this man! He stole my PS5!" I was dumbfounded, but I quickly explained to the officer that I had bought the PS5 at Bullseye, recounting the events that had transpired with Susan inside the store. The officer seemed extremely confused but requested that I prove that the PS5 was indeed mine and that I had paid for it. Susan immediately jumped in, stating that, "Absolutely not. He knows I bought it, and he grabbed it from me in the parking lot. Thank goodness you're here, officer." I knew that my card number would be on a receipt as I had worked in retail many years ago, so I confidently said, "Well, I also have the receipt if that helps." Susan, in her dim-witted glory, immediately claimed that I had stolen the receipt from her too. This is where I had a triumphant moment of clarity. I pointed out that all receipts display the last 4 digits of the card used for the purchase, as well as the first initial and last name of the card holder. Susan continued to insist, "Yeah, and my name is on it." With a sense of victory, I pulled out my driver's license, bank card, and receipt, handing them over to the officer. Everything matched perfectly. The officer thanked me and handed back my belongings, turning to face Susan. She, however, wasn't giving up without a fight. She screamed, "Well, aren't you going to arrest him for being drunk? He was all over the road." The officer took a moment, then pulled out his handcuffs and slapped them on Susan's wrist. She looked absolutely terrified as she asked what he was doing. The officer calmly explained that Susan was under arrest for making a false report, misuse of 911, and for violating the state's stalking laws. While I got to enjoy my hard-earned PS5, Susan faced the consequences of her actions. Her car was towed and she spent the entire weekend in lockup. When all was said and done, she pleaded guilty to making a false police report and harassment. I wasn't privy to the exact terms of her punishment, but she was placed on a 2-year probation and banned from setting foot in the local Bullseye until her probation was completed. My ex-wife was a school teacher. As such, I always volunteered to help around the school and help her and other teachers with some of the things they needed help with, like artistic bulletin boards and such. One day I took her to school and the staff had a meeting. I was working on replacing the artwork in the bulletin board near the front to match the current seasons and events before I go to work. I had my visitor badge on and everything, and in comes this crazy lady with her kid. She walks up to me and says, "Here, please take him to the cafeteria." I'm in a hurry. For context, you should know that in my country, unless it's your job, you can get into a lot of trouble if I agree. I told her, "Lady, I don't work here. You'll have to take him in yourself," while pointing to my visitor badge, which she 100% ignored. She proceeded to say that you will take my child and escort him because I pay your salary. I smiled and politely said, "Again, I don't work here. And no, you don't." I turned to continue working on the board and she grabbed me to turn me around, and my visitor badge hit her square in the eye. She screamed and yelled and accused me of assaulting her. At the noise, the staff who just finished their meeting came out and my ex-wife and principal came toward us to know what happened. Karen was already on the phone with the police and accusing me of assaulting her. I explained the situation to my ex and the principal and asked him to prepare the camera footage for the police when they arrive. The Karen is now screaming at the principal demanding that I get fired. The principal keeps explaining that I don't work here and that I'm a volunteer who is married to one of their teachers, but she won't have it. The police arrive and take our statements. The staff showed them the video and it was clearly her fault. They asked me if I wanted to press charges and I say yes. She was taken away in handcuffs, kicking and screaming. She had the officers in the process, which added to her charges. She ended up with 6 months in prison and 500 hours of community service. Hey guys, just wanted to thank you for the amazing response to my personal request yesterday that, if you're a regular viewer of my channel, to please subscribe. Usually I get like 30 to 60 new subscribers per day at max, but yesterday alone after I asked you guys for support, so I truly appreciate that. It kinda felt like thanking you properly like this. And please, if you haven't subscribed yet, kindly press the button down below. It would really help me a bunch. Sorry for making you wait. Let's move to our next story. So, I'm a fat girl. I don't sugarcoat it. I'm not a fat advocate and don't believe if you're morbidly obese you should get special treatment, but I don't fat shame people except myself either. I just exist in the fat world and don't care about losing weight. August 2021, I was in a horrible car accident and dislocated and shattered my hip bone. I was wheelchair bound for 3 months and had crutches for 2 more. While being wheelchair bound, I had to use the electric wheelchairs for grocery shopping, and my siblings helped me a lot too. But I would always bring my home wheelchair just in case someone needed this wheelchair more. Sometimes I would give people who thought I was just fat and lazy because I didn't look injured unless I wore shorts. You could see the scars and stitches. So I understand. One day in September I was rolling around in a scooter and a lady came up to me. Here is the conversation. You know, being lazy like this will not only hurt you but other people too. And you should be letting the elderly use this. Oh, I apologize, but actually, you don't have some disorder that makes you this fat. My daughter is a nurse, she would know. Ma'am, I completely agree, but I don't care. I am elderly and need it more. I decide to just shut up and pull my pants down a little to show the stitches. You pervert! How dare you flash me? Ma'am, I'm broken. I was in a car accident. That's a lie. Children don't break hips. Those are fake. I was 21, 22 right now. Okay ma'am, please just get lost. I start to roll away and she stands in front of me demanding the cart. I tell her to get lost again and she comes back around to the side to start pulling my arm. With this, it makes my hip start hurting pretty bad. But security walks up and says pretty much to let her have it and that I don't need it without even asking questions. At this point, I was just annoyed and pretty much said fine. Just let me call my sister to bring my wheelchair. The security officer said that's fine, but I have to get out of the chair to wait. I decided then to explain the same thing, but he didn't believe me until I showed him the stitches. He then turned to the lady and said that he would get her one, but she couldn't have that one, so she got enraged and said, "She's faking it," and pushed me almost out of the chair and hurt me so much. I finally decided to call the cops and tell them that there was a crazy lady who was hurting me and I feared for my safety. The security guard was now holding the lady and I waited for the police. They held the lady down and she was screaming everything in the book: harassment, assault, police brutality, and so on. I gave them my statement and ID and they called for backup because this lady was now hurting cops and they couldn't hold her down properly. Another cop showed up and she was one of the ones who helped me in my accident, and so pretty much she corroborated my story. In the end, the lady was arrested and I was let go. I took some pain meds and continued shopping. I work fast food, so I know all about Karens, unfortunately. A few years ago, when I was in year 6, I got this teacher, let's call her Mrs. D, and she absolutely hated my family. From my mom to my brother and by extension, me. Some context. Younger brother was in year 5 at this point, but in year 1, my mom began pushing for him to be referred. This teacher was one of several that lied and said he was tested and didn't have anything wrong. They had an unqualified teacher do this test on him, and then about a third of the staff backed her up. My parents had to go private and spent a lot between a couple hundred and £1,000. We now know he's dyslexic and has ADD, which my mom also has, whilst my dad and several other members of our family have dyslexia. This teacher continued crap with my family, and after years I had her as my year 6 teacher. She hated me, despite the fact that I was a classic shy kid and didn't bother anyone. I have social anxiety and regularly get panic attacks, but she wouldn't let me leave the classroom. Mrs. D's torment continued for a total of 10 months, and after shouting at me in front of the class for missing the summer performance, I was at home throwing up for 3 days and had a temperature of 39 Celsius. It wasn't even like I had lines. We all just sang the songs and that was it. On the Monday of my final week in that school is when the assembly will happen. The week before the leavers assembly. My entire class is writing our speeches as we are all required. I completed mine, and it had all that stereotypical boring stuff, but Mrs. D was out to get me and decided to rewrite the entire thing for me. Turns out, she did this to most in my class, then rips up my speech in front of me. That Sunday night, my angry 11-year-old self wrote the most passive-aggressive speech in the history of speeches. I was out telling Mrs. D. I read it out to a room of my 30 classmates, all our parents and grandparents, plus a bunch of my old teachers and our head teacher. Everyone was filming and laughing then. At the back of the room, I saw the look of terror in her eyes. But I didn't stop and even show the speech she wrote before ripping it up to shreds. At the end, I gave the reward to a classmate of mine before walking off the stage with the biggest smirk ever. Highlights include, thanks to Mrs. D, I now know that it's not what you know but who you know. She favored those with parents on the PTA. And I also said something about her judging my family yet being too busy with her phone to notice the fact that her kids were running across the road unsupervised and 2 of them were nearly hit by a car when they suddenly run in front of a car. I was walking by and saw that. Another is, I'm very grateful for some people and have a lot of respect for those people like Mrs. G and Mrs. M. Luckily for her, Mrs. D doesn't have to be burdened with that kind of stress, or I'm sure everyone knows of the character. Mrs. Trunchbull, thanks to Mrs. D, I was able to experience her in person. There was more, but I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head because it was about 6 years ago. Afterwards, I had parents and some teachers come up to me and congratulate me on my speech. One of the best moments of my life to this day. Edit. Before you say anything rude, please think about what you're gonna post as you are saying it to 11-year-old me. Yes, I was gonna push and acted mature for my age because of a lot of bullying I dealt with. Edit 2. Since some people brought it up, I never saw her after year 6 until recently, as my younger sister went there and she hugged me. I think realization hit her hard back then. When I came to school the next day, I became a sort of a legend all week, and people from my primary school still bring it up. I never got in much trouble other than being told that I should have stuck to her speech for me. This story takes place in 2018. I was 1 year out of high school, living in a small northern California town, known for wine and Creedence Clearwater Revival song. I was living with my girlfriend at the time. It was a bad relationship that I'm glad to be out of. The entitled parent of the story was her mom. Her sister was the entitled kid. And for the sake of privacy, let's just call them ex-girlfriend, entitled mom, and of course, the entitled kid. It was payday for the entitled mom's disability, so it was time to go grocery shopping. Me, my ex, the entitled mom, and the entitled kid all load into the car and head to the grocery store. When we got there, the entitled kid ran right for the electric cart for people with limited mobility. The entitled kid was 11 years old and perfectly capable of walking, but we ignored her because it wasn't worth the fight. The grocery shopping itself was pretty uneventful. The fireworks didn't start until we started to leave the store. Me and X did our own grocery shopping with our own money, and we took our stuff and went to go wait out in the car. Next thing we know, the entitled mother was texting us saying, "You need to get in here right now and back me up." We thought that she was in real trouble, so we ran back into the store. And to our absolute horror, the entitled mother was screaming at the top of her lungs, "How dare you yell at my daughter? She's only 11 years old." The employee she was yelling at was calmly trying to explain that she didn't yell at the kid. She simply told her to get off of the mobility scooter cart because they were made for the disabled and the elderly. And this is when the entitled kid chimes in.
"She's lying. She yelled at me and called me stupid."
There was absolutely no truth to this. The entitled kid was a pathological liar. She lied about everything all the time for no reason. The entitled mother's face went completely red, and she started screaming again. "My daughter is disabled. Her leg is broken, and how dare you call her stupid?" The entitled kid had actually broken her leg. 2 years prior to this interaction, she could walk just fine. Me and my ex never actually got to say anything. The entitled mother demanded that all of her groceries be put back and that she wouldn't be paying. She then demanded that me and my ex walk out with her and go back to the car. I said, "You guys go ahead. I'm gonna use a bathroom real quick." The entitled mother said,
"Fine, but hurry up."
As soon as everybody was out of earshot, I walked up to the employee she was screaming at, who was shaken up and on the verge of tears, and immediately started apologizing profusely. I was beyond embarrassed and offered to help put the groceries back. She thanked me but said that wouldn't be necessary. After I got back in the car, the entitled mother tried to tell us that we weren't allowed to shop there anymore, and that if she finds out we did, she would treat it as a betrayal to the family. And I had enough at this point. And I said, "You know, that was really embarrassing. You made a huge scene. Your kid was perfectly capable of walking but decided she wanted to play with electric cart. You can't just scream at people to get your way. You're setting your daughter up for failure and teaching her that she can just throw a tantrum to get her way." The entitled mother just sat there for a minute, her mouth agape, and when she finally spoke, she screamed, "Get out of my car!" And I said, "Fine by me. I don't want to be around you right now anyway." My ex started to get upset at this point and said, "Please just get back in the car and come home with us. Just swallow your pride and apologize." At this point in our relationship, she had already shown her true colors. She was an abusive, manipulative piece of garbage that I later found out cheated on me multiple times. I just looked at her and said, "Screw that. I'm sick of having to bottle up my feelings and be the first to apologize for everything. I'm going to my grandma's for a while. I just need to not be around you guys for a while." My grandma's house was literally 4 blocks away. I walked over there, hung out with my brother for a while. I told him what happened and he told me I needed to get out of that relationship and just move back home. This was advice that I wouldn't heed for another few months. Things got really dark in that relationship, and I'm glad it's over, and I will never have to see those people ever again. We had a volleyball tournament. For reference, I'm a middle blocker, 6'5" and a vert of 70 centimeters. The game starts and everything goes good. Eventually, the entitled dad's kid gets subbed in because his team wasn't scoring, and apparently he's a star player. I blocked every hit he went for and his dad started to get visibly angry. Started to shout at me and stuff as well. After the game ended, we won, and I blocked nearly every shot from this guy. The entitled dad came to me asking what my problem is and stuff like this. I said, "Sorry man, it's my job." He started laughing and then stomped on my shin. It's broken now, and I'm currently in hospital writing this story. And I was told that the dad should end up in jail. Also planning on suing for permanent damages. Doctor says I may not be able to play volleyball ever again. And I got a college offer. An update was a lot of hope. So it seems my friend was recording my volleyball match so I can reflect on what to improve on. It caught everything the guy did. So it seems my friend was recording my volleyball match so I can reflect on what to improve on. And he caught everything the guy did. My dad talked with his lawyer friends. And while I can make a post like this, no video is allowed to be published until after the case. I will post the video once a lawyer gives me the clear. In terms of suing, I'm able to sue him for everything I've lost because of this. And that since I had video proof, I will be able to easily press charges and will win the case. I appreciate all the love and support from you guys. I will keep updating you on how the case goes and make sure the lawyer proofreads everything to make sure it won't impact my case negatively. Thank you for everyone and keep tuned. I can't wait to publish this video. Another update. Even more good news. It's now business time and the lawyers have started work. They contacted police for footage and such, and were able to identify the man, currently processing the lawsuit. In Australia, I was told it's much quicker and easier. Thanks for your advice also guys. I have contacted the college which offered the scholarship and I'm now awaiting a reply from them. I will be bedridden for a while but I'm drinking my milk and eating healthy for a speedy recovery. My lawyer has informed me that publishing any videos online regarding the situation will be used against me in court. So I hope you guys can wait until after to see the brutal video. Thank you for watching and see you next time.